Hello, once again, this is Dialogs about homelessness, and normally you see a woman here, Valerie, but she is sick this week, and this is Kevin Brissett. You might have seen me last week on the show. And as usual, we usually do have a homeless person on the show to talk about homelessness, believe it or not, but this week we do have a formerly homeless person and also happens to be the president of House the Homeless, on the board for National Coalition for the Homeless and Legal Aid for the Homeless, the one and only Richard Troxell. How you doing, Richard?
Hey, Kevin. Good to be here. Good to be back on the show again. Thanks for having me.
We don't mind having you. Richard, you're currently working on a major project that many people might have heard of through the media, newspapers, TV, and that's the Riverwoods Apartments complex. There's some trouble over there.
Yeah, there is some trouble over at Riverwood Apartments. It's 107 South Congress. It's right across the street from the School for the Deaf, which is now really nothing more than a pile of dirt. It's a couple of streets just south of Riverside, and actually we've got a couple of pictures here if Jessica can focus on those after a minute. And there's 110 units of housing over there that's about to be demolished, and we took umbrage with the fact that this is excellent housing. You can see here, this bottom photograph here is, these are hundreds of year-old trees. This is recycled brick, high quality, most expensive you can imagine. The question is whether or not the property is habitable. And I was out there. I was the director of housing from a neighborhood association in Philadelphia, 55 square block area. And I'm also a stone mason, a brick mason. I was out there. I did an evaluation externally on these on this facility. It's in great shape. The roof lines are true. The foundations are not cracked. The brickwork is in good shape. So we first heard about this through Legal Aid, where I also work, who's representing Mr. James Patterson, the last known tenant on the property. And they're defending him against an eviction, which has been served. So what had happened with this particular property and why Legal Aid is involved, because you know they represent low-income people. They're involved because back in 1971, this property went through what's called the RTC, the Resolution Trust Corporation. It was part of the savings and loan debacle, where everybody, this was the last boom, and it went south. And when it went south, a lot of it happened here in Texas. And the properties fell into the hands of the federal government as they foreclosed them. And the federal government was supposed to go ahead and protect the taxpayers as best it could, so it was going to sell them for, you know, something on the dollar, try and save whatever they could. So they sold this facility for about $725,000, plus a set-aside. It was a set-aside for 35% set aside for low-income persons. So at that particular facility, people were to spend no more than a third of their income on housing. And so that set-aside was very, very important. So the property was sold, as I say, and it was later sold again. It was sold to Trammell Crow, which is a big developer here in Texas and actually throughout the country. And what we learned was that when they got it, there was no more set-aside. So we were very concerned about what had happened to the set-aside. And it turned out Mr. Cunningham, who had worked for the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, had written a report. He later, he wrote the report for Embry Corporation, which was a developer, and was compensated about $1,700, and wrote a very kind of superficial report. And in the report, he said that the property was no longer habitable. That was number one. And number two, that it was no longer fixable. So that even though it wasn't habitable, that no matter what you did, it wasn't economically feasible to fix it up and make it better. So based on that, the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs turned to the federal government, the FDIC, and said, okay, you can release the LORA. It's a land use restriction agreement. And that's the thing that put the 35% set-aside in place. So they said, you can release the 35% set-aside. You don't have to have that more because this property is beyond its useful life. And so you don't have to do that. Well, it was supposed to last until like 2013. But with this report, it allowed that property to be passed on, sold to Trammell Crow, with them believing, or with the understanding at that point, that it was free and clear for them to tear it down and to build something else. Their plan is to build 256 units of luxury apartment. If you look at Mr. Patterson's rent, $350, and you compare that to the new rents with no set-aside, you have what we call a rent rocket. It's going to go overnight, literally, from $350 to $1,200. And that's really a shame, because what we have here is what we call a South Austin gem. These buildings, this whole complex, is 12 different buildings nestled in oaks and pecan trees, and it wraps down, it drops down, gets lower and lower on the gradation, moves towards the river. And the temperature is extremely cool because of these massive trees there. It's very pleasant because it's so green, and it's hidden away, it's tucked away right off of Congress Avenue, South Congress. It's really quite an amazing situation.
So it's basically filling the same role that it was meant to fill back in the 80s when the savings and loan went under or whatever. It's basically fine. There's no problem with it at all.
In terms of housing and being capable of housing, well, the reason that we say yes to that question is because for over a year after Mr. Cunningham had written his report and said it was uninhabitable, people inhabited it. It was 100% occupied for over a year after that. So we say the facts alone belie that particular argument. And then with his report, he wrote such a skimpy report that when he said it wasn't fixable, which was the second criteria, whether they could get rid of the LoRa or not, get rid of the 35% set-aside, he didn't say, oh, and that foundation on that building of theirs cracked, and that'll take $3,000 to fix that, and that roof line is leaking, that'll cost you another $2,500. There was no itemization, there was no justification for why they could say it was not feasibly possible to fix it up. So we challenged that, and Legal Aid came forward and they challenged that on the basis of the eviction. So as Mr. Patterson received his eviction notice, they said, wait a minute, he's protected under this LoRa that gives the tenants the right to come in and comment, and he wasn't given notice. So we went into court over that, and we got an injunction from Judge Suzanne Covington, who said, stop the eviction, stop the demolition, and let's look at it. So at that point, we were told Mr. Patterson had to go and get money, get himself some engineers, and go in there and get a current, independent report to say what was the condition of the property today. So we did that.
When was this about?
Last week.
Last week.
So, and again, a couple of days ago, we went back into court, fully prepared to present the engineer's reports on two levels. One, the external facade, the foundation, the roof lines. One engineer was reporting on that. And then, in addition, there was another engineer that did internal systems, heating, air conditioning, electric. And then those two reports were to be presented, and then, of course, Trammell Crow was going to come in and make its argument that they were really a pile of rubble. You know, these beautiful things that you've seen the picture of. Maybe we could pan back to Jessica for people that haven't had a chance to see just really how gorgeous and well kept up, for the most part, these properties are. We really only have some deferred maintenance on any of these units. But other than that, the structure, Kevin, is solid. There's no doubt about it, and that's what we were prepared and what we had found in the engineer reports. So we were all prepared to go to court to have that happen, and this time we ended up in Judge Scott F. McCowan's court. I believe that's the 253rd. But Judge McCowan, as he looked out to Mr. Patterson, his representatives, Trammell Crow, and the state was also there. House the Homeless had just come in from an educational picket. We had done an educational picket on the Sunday before, try to let people know about this problem, that we were concerned. We wanted people in South Austin to know that we believe that we're on the edge of gentrification with the demolition, potential demolition of this property, that people are tearing down outsiders are tearing down perfectly good housing stock and coming in and building something better because they think it can make more dollars. So that's gentrification, and we wanted to be sure the neighbors knew about that. So we had done that on Sunday, and this afternoon, on the afternoon that they went back into court, we had also demonstrated, educational picket, had our leaflets, went in front of the courthouse to explain to people exactly what the demonstration was about so people could understand it in bullet form. And so we did that, and we were there for the last 5 minutes of the hearing, and all we heard was that the judge had skipped over the engineer's reports from both sides, and he said, look, let me just cut right to the chase. Mr. Patterson is about to be evicted, but he's resisting the eviction, and Trammell Crow wants to develop this property, so why don't we just have Trammell Crow pay for Mr. Patterson's eviction, relocation somewhere else, and then y'all, Legal Aid and Trammell Crow and the state, go into mediation over what should happen with this property. So that he said that, and then he said, and this is dealing with how many units, and he sort of said it to the court in general, and the response was 40. And the judge said, well, turned to Trammell Crow, and he said, do you have any problem with that scenario? And Trammell Crow said, no, they had no problem whatsoever. Legal Aid said they had no problem. And I'm sitting back there behind Legal Aid and behind Trammell Crow going, we have a serious problem. We couldn't say anything. You're in court. You can't say anything. We have a very serious problem with that. And the reason we have a serious problem is because, yes, there are 40 units that are currently being affected. But follow me with this logic, if you would. In 1991, they valued the property at $725,000 plus the LORA, which was the 35% set aside for low-income people. In 1999, the value of the same property has inflated to be worth 256 units, what they want to build, a 4-tier car garage, and the LORA. So that's the new value. It's the same property, but it has new terms, new definitions of what its value is. The value hasn't changed. It's inflated along with everything else. So we said, and we said this in a letter today to Judge McCowan and in a letter to Daisy Steiner, the head of the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, what right does anybody have to degrade the LORA? That is to say, it shouldn't be 40 units. It should be 35% of the total units. Well, 35% of the total units is 90 units. 90 units minus 40 units is a loss of 50 units. And that's what we said in the letter today, that the taxpayers who were supposed to be protected by the Resolution Trust Corporation, who valued the property at $725,000 and said that it was also worth this 35% set aside for low-income people, that's the value for the taxpayers. That's where your taxpayer dollars went, was in this package. Well, it's still the same taxpayer dollars. It's still what we as taxpayers invested back in 1971. Well, it's now 1991, and it's now 1999. We should still be protected, and nobody can affect our money and just arbitrarily sign off the value of our money. Get rid of, I mean, it's almost as if somebody, first, there's certainly a question about that inspection, and that's why Mr. Patterson has called in the FBI. You know, was there any financial aggrandizement or benefit to anybody along the way? You know, that's very suspect, the way that whole happened and evolved. Mr. Patterson calculated out that just for the 35% units, the set-aside, that value in the whole deal, if given out to their natural life, the year 2013, was worth $13 million. Is there any wonder that there may have been some hanky-panky to get rid of that little piece of this? Well, that was the taxpayer investment. So today, House the Homeless wrote this letter saying that we have standing because we represent all homeless and all formerly homeless persons in Austin. And the LORA said that anybody who was renting and eligible in the complex, or anybody who was income eligible that could potentially rent there. And so that's our clients, the homeless population. Which really brings us back to why are we out here, you know, involved in affordable housing? Why are we saying this is important to the homeless community. This is homelessness prevention. You know, God doesn't make homeless people. You know, things do, actions do, and it's this kind of action that has turned out all of these people who are paying $350 rent. My God, you know, where are they going to go?
Where are they going to go? And what I want to ask is, where is the government, the city council, what's their stand on the whole issue?
Well, the city has stepped in and said it's willing to try and give tax breaks to try and make this deal work so that the low-income set-aside is protected. So we're very pleased that they've taken that stance at all. The state, however, has been mute. As a matter of fact, people from the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs under Daisy Steiner, under whose administration this did not happen. This did not originally happen under Daisy Steiner's administration. It happened under the administration of Paul Manley, okay? But this is a new day and a new administration, and that's why we're appealing to Daisy Steiner under the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs today to step in and just say, look, a mistake was made. This property never should have transferred to Trammell Crow. You should protect this incredible housing stock. And above all, you should protect the 35% set-aside and the integrity of the LoRa, the 35% set-aside, so that it's not diminished from what would be 90 units down to 40 units.
Has there been precedent for a case like this?
This is the first time I've heard of this, and I know that Legal Aid is very concerned. The attorney representing Legal Aid in this issue is Fred Fuchs, and one of the things that he is very concerned about is hoping that some legislatures' attention will be captured by this. We did receive a phone call from Lon Burnham's office who expressed interest. I know Glenn Maxey used to live in these apartments. Terry Keel came up to me when we were on the picket line. Said, Richard, I used to live in that apartment right over there. You know, and so what we're hoping is that there can be legislation from the legislatures that this used to be where they all lived, that they will come forward and say, and to protect this from ever happening again and ensure that there are safeguards. So, because, you know, South Austin and East Austin are on the precipice at the very beginning of gentrification. And if this goes forward, and right now the judges said they can demolish the property, and if this goes forward and the set-aside is not preserved, then by God, the green light will be on. The developers are going to run in and they're going to buy up anything they can, not just vacant lots, not just buildings that are uninhabitable, you know, shacks and things that are ramshackle. They're going to buy things from people that are being used, like Rainey Street. We've written this book, Housing Homeless has written this book called Striking a Balance. Well, right there, Rainey Street, one of our oldest, most sacrosanct neighborhoods in Austin, right there, just barely west of IH-35, across from the convention center, tucked away, is this gorgeous neighborhood sitting on the river, and people have been offered what sounds like a windfall of money. Bought their houses for maybe $15,000, and someone's walked in, they reach in their pocket, and they go down there, and they pull out this big wad of money, and they start, you know, saying, well, you only paid $15,000. Right today, I'll give you $115,000. And we say, wait, caution. Realize that you cannot replicate your lifestyle for anything short of maybe $200,000 or even $315,000. Where can you find 300-year-old oaks like that neighborhood? Where can you live on the river like that neighborhood? Where can you find the peace, quiet, and tranquility that is all about family that you can find in that neighborhood? So our message today, our clearest message, if we could present it, is to both East and to South Austin, and be careful. Join together as neighbors. Make these big businesses that are coming into Austin come into your institutions. Have them come into your churches. Have the churches filter what's going on. And if they build something, if they're bound and determined to build something, then as a community, we need to stand up and say, oh, okay, well, we'll allow that variance to go forward, or but we want something for the community. We want a new park, or we want new sidewalks, or we want something of value. Don't let them just come in as carpetbaggers into these two major areas of our cities without doing that. And the people need to figure out what they want in each instance. So they need to be unified, and they need to talk. So they need to meet together, but they need to do it now versus later. And I should just point out how ironic this is, this thing with the apartments. A new apartment association was formed the same weekend we first picketed. It's right up the street. It's called Chateau de Ville. And people are living in there. One of our homeless clients we've now housed in there, Joanne Kopekian, I know she wouldn't mind me mentioning her name, is housed in there. And they formed a new tenants association because they're afraid of what they know is going to happen, because their apartment complex is 3 or 4 times much more disheveled than this property. So who's next? What's next? And it's fully occupied. So we're seeing this as a major red flag about to go off in the city, and that's why we've taken the time to go out and conduct educational pickets, and that's why we've gotten the support of the Austin Area Homeless Coalition, the Texas Alliance for Human Needs. Several other organizations have gotten involved. Texas Low-Income Housing Information Services was initially involved in unearthing this. The Austin Tenants Council is supporting the new forming of that new tenants association. And of course, House the Homeless is leading the charge publicly, but now, behind the scenes, other groups have to come forward and make this, put these protections in place.
What can people do now to stop what's going on at Riverwood Apartments?
I don't know that they can stop the demolition, but I think that they can help preserve anything happening to that 35% set-aside. You remember, once they demolish it, then the Trammell Crow will argue, well, the law was only as good as long as it was inhabited and fixed. Well, this show, Cindy Britt Schneider went out and videotaped the outsides and several insides of that facility. We preserved that for the court record. So we did that. But individuals can come join House the Homeless. You can call us at our, contact us at our website, www.housethehomeless.org. You can call me, 796-4366. You can join the Austin Area Homeless Coalition, which meets the third Friday of each month at the Arch facility, Austin's Resource Center for the Homeless. That's the new Resource Center, which is at 501 West 7th Street, 701 West 5th Street. Excuse me, got dislocated there. 701 West 5th Street. Jessica on the camera got me straightened out. Thanks. And that's the third Friday. We meet there at 8:30 on the third Friday of each month, so people can join us there. And we invite neighbors, because a lot of neighbors came out and took our information, and they're more than welcome to join us at the Homeless Coalition.
Is there any real pressure, do you think, you can put on companies like Trammell Crow and all these other companies to stop them from getting the easy buck?
Well, I think that if people stand united and say that they won't, that they're not being fooled, I mean, and if neighbors say, well, I will take the $215,000, that's fine. But they've got to be sure that they can relocate themselves and that they've preserved their lifestyle. But we want them to make an informed decision. And they're not going to make an informed decision if we allow ourselves to be picked off one at a time. And so again, we need to get together and meet and talk and present our positions to organizations like Trammell Crow. And then the state, the CADA, was supposed to be the watchguard of the taxpayers and the watchguard of the poor people and the watchguard of the homeless. They're supposed to prevent homelessness. This is their task. And we beseech you, we ask you today, Daisy Steiner, to see our message, to hear our words, and to respond and say, yes, you're right, there's been mistakes made, but we can move forward. We can at least protect the integrity of this law. We can preserve the rights of the low-income people, and we too can participate in this coalition to prevent homelessness.
All right. How's media attention been throughout this? Have they looked favorably upon
the media's been great. Initially, we had trouble trying to communicate with some of the media what was going on, because they said, well, you'll never win. And we said, well, we may never win in your perspective, you know, because they felt that the courts support the moneyed interests, and they've seen that traditionally. We're about changing that. That's number one. But the way we can do it is if we can see what's happening. If they can present the story. If they can present the story, then we can help educate people, and then people can unite in their own neighborhood. We're not operating any bigger level than that. We're just talking about people on their own block saying, what's going to happen here when they come in? Well, one thing you can do is you can reduce it to writing and say, I was offered money for my house. Tell them how much and spend it, send it around. Don't be secretive about it. They'll say, don't tell anybody. Don't do that. Raise the price. Everybody, get them to raise the price so much so they have to decide. Am I willing to spend, give them $315,000 for their house? Is it worth it to me, to them? Well, if it's not worth it to you for whatever they offer to move out, then they'll offer more, you know. Make the deal or break the deal, but you be in charge. The people need to step out and take control of their situation because the other side just wants to pick us off.
All right. How do you, what do you think the city council really thinks about all this and the mayor? Because they've talked a lot about smart growth.
Well, you know, and I sat on the Affordable Housing Task Force, and House the Homeless wrote wages as a barrier to affordable housing. That was the piece that we presented into that, and in that we presented our formula for a universal living wage. So they gave good lip service. At this point, the city is moving to create a housing trust. They're going to kick it off with only $1 million, though. We want $10 million. We want $10 million to come from the sale of the Robert Mueller Airport because that is a windfall. Nobody anticipated that. So if they really want to do that, if people really want to preserve and protect low-income housing, like the lead editorial here on this Sunday's paper, get Sunday's paper out and read it. They talked about the Riverwood apartments, they talked about Jim Patterson, and they talked about the bigger concept of saving affordable housing in Austin. If you want to do something, call 499-2000. Ask to speak to the mayor or any of your city council members you want to, and tell them you want $10 million in the housing trust. You want to kick it off with $10 million. You want them to put in $10 million a year. These companies are making billions of dollars. The high-tech companies, the companies are coming in. CSC, the ones that just demolished the Homeless Resource Center, you know. What was the buy-in for that? What were they asked to contribute? They're getting tax write-offs, all this. We're red carpeting. How are they contributing to our community? That's what we have to say. You tell your city council member, hey, we're willing to bring people in to build up our community. But by God, let's get something for the community and not just lip service, not just a few jobs. And I'm talking these have to be jobs that pay at least $9.09 an hour for a one-bedroom apartment. That's what the Austin Living Wage Coalition, using the formula created by House the Homeless, is calling for. And you can find that on our website, www.housethehomeless.org. Look us up, find our formula, see what's going on. Plug into the Austin Area Homeless Coalition, see what we're doing. We're meeting the third Friday of each month. Just come to the facility. We're at 701 West 5th Street, 8:30, third Friday of each month. Join us. This is what you got to do.
All right, so one last thing. So what's our next step here in this whole process? When's the next court battle? Or?
Well, the principal parties are going into mediation tomorrow, Tuesday, to see what they're going to do with regard to, I guess, what kind of deal they're going to cut for Mr. Patterson. It's pretty much that. But I don't know who is defending or protecting the interests of the low-income people and the taxpayers, and that would be Daisy Steiner. So I would hope that the state would step in and protect our interests at that mediation. And after that, I suspect that House the Homeless is preparing an educational picket to take to the streets in front of the state building to say that the state building, that TCATA, the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, is responsible for this. It created this situation, and it needs to step in immediately and rectify the situation.
Are these closed mediations tomorrow? Can people attend?
Mediations tomorrow are closed. However, I'm sure the results will be reported in the paper. Andy Alfred wrote the last couple of stories. She's a reporter at the Statesman. You can contact the Statesman and find out what's going on, what she's doing, and what's happening next. You can always call House the Homeless 796-4366. We're happy to keep you abreast of the story.
All right. Sounds great. What other projects are House the Homeless involved with right now?
Well, we've got two major things in the hopper. One is a universal living wage. And again, like I said, you can see about our formula. But it enables people in any city to attain a wage that they could get housing in that city. So it's adapted to each city, and it's indexed to housing. It's a dynamic concept. First time anybody has ever come up with an idea on how we can end homelessness. So we have that going, and the second thing is we want the alcohol companies to pay for substance abuse treatment. Look, they're